what the word world could mean. The word world could also mean the people of the world. For God so loved the world. Well, that doesn't mean the creation in the trees, does it? The landscape, the beauty of the world. No, it's talking about the people of the world. Well, I don't think this verse is teaching us God loved the world, but you shouldn't. That's not what it's teaching, okay? It's not talking about the people of the world. Third one, I hope you figure out this is the one. The word world could also mean the world in all of its sinfulness, its anti-God mindset, its philosophy, its standards, and its actions. In my mind, it is synonymous with darkness. Back in chapter 1, verse 5. Okay, so the Bible is just reminding us through John here that we should not love this world. Nor, the Bible goes on to say, the things that are in the world. Now, he gets specific about those in verse 16. So, look, it's just a simple thought here. Don't love the world and don't love the things that are in the world. Well, what are the things that are in the world? He tells us in verse number 16. But before we get to verse 16, let's finish verse 15. It says, if any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Okay, now remember, this isn't saying that if you love the world, you're not saved. It's not talking about God's love towards you. It's talking about your love toward God. John shows us an impossibility. What's the impossibility? If I'm loving the world, then I can't be loving the Father. That's quite a statement when you stop and think about it. It goes back to verses 6 and 7 of chapter 1. You cannot be walking in darkness and be in fellowship with God. It's impossible. All right? So, if we want to be practical about this, then, it would be this. You cannot be loving the world or the things that are in the world and be loving God at the same time. So there needs to be a loyalty on our part to God. By the way, the flip side would be true as well. If you're loving God as you ought to, then you would not be loving the world like oftentimes would be the case. So it's just, it's as Matthew talks about, no man can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. James 4, verse 4, ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. You can't have it both ways. You just can't. There's no happy medium either. You're either loving God or you're loving the world. So, the reminder is simply this. You're saved, so don't love the world. Not a whole lot different than the very beginning of the chapter. My little children, these things write unto you that ye sin not. You know what I picture John doing? I don't know how your mind views things sometimes. I picture John, and he's got a 4x4 piece of wood there. All right? And he's got a big old nail, a spike. And he's trying to drive home this nail through that 4x4. But if you've ever done that, you realize, generally speaking, you can't do it with one swing. At least I can't, okay? So you come at it and you whack it. And it goes a little ways, so what do? There you go, sister. You rear back and you whack it again. In other words, John isn't going to change his theme. He's not going to come to a point in this book where he says, well, maybe a little sin's okay. No. All he's doing is he's whacking the thing over and over and over. He's trying to drive home a truth which could be embodied in verse 1. My little children, these things write unto you that ye sin not. And if you're like me, sometimes you need it to be whacked again and again and again so that finally it drives home that truth in your mind. Say, Brother Cole, you've been a little redundant. No, we followed the passage, okay? We're following exactly what it says, and that's the whole point of it. Yeah. I wonder if maybe this could be fairly important or something that maybe believers would struggle with. You think?
Yeah.
Well, I certainly would be of the same opinion. So now in verse 16, he gets specific about what loving this world is all about. He says, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. Okay, so now we've got some specifics. Maybe you have thought to yourself, okay, if I'm not supposed to love the world, I wonder if I'm guilty of that. How would I know? Well, verse 16 will help you. Let's break it down. There are three different groups here. Number one is the lust of the flesh. What is the flesh? The flesh is that sinful human nature. The sinful nature that has no regard for God and therefore is of the world. Here's the fundamental difference between worldly philosophy and biblical philosophy. Worldly philosophy follows the flesh. That transcends culture. That transcends geographical boundaries. In other words, the guy in China who's a heathen is no different than the guy in Fort Lauderdale that is, because they both follow their flesh. Okay? So when the Bible talks about the lust of the flesh, it's talking about that sinful nature that has no regard for God and is therefore of the world. Let me remind you of this. Your flesh, your sinful nature is bad. It's vile. And it's wicked. The Apostle Paul said, for I know in me, that is in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. Okay? We looked at John 16:63. It is the Spirit that quickeneth, the flesh profiteth nothing. It's not as if when you got saved, all of a sudden you got a good flesh. No. Same old flesh. Matter of fact, the only solution for it is to die. That's it. That's the only thing that's going to work, okay? To be dead to your flesh. And your flesh is bad. You know what it does? What does the Bible tell us it does in this passage? For the lust of the flesh. Your flesh lusts. What would you describe as a lust? I know that can be perverted, but don't be perverted about it, but just be basic with it. What do we think of when we think of a lust?
Covetous desire.
A desire.
Obsession.
An obsession. I lust for chocolate. Do you? My wife does. I did good on Valentine's Day. I got her a Godiva chocolate cheesecake. And it's all but almost gone now. We like chocolate. So, in other words, here's what happened. We got the Godiva chocolate cheesecake. It went into the refrigerator. Valentine's Day was a little over a week ago. And do you know, because we lust chocolate, that thing's almost gone? Why? Because your lust is something that wants to be fed. That's part and parcel of something that you would lust after. It wants you to give it what it is longing for, what it is desiring, what it is obsessed with, okay? So your flesh is going to lust. Now, that makes sense, so here's what I want you to know. Don't feed it. It has a ravenous appetite. Don't feed it, and it's never satisfied. Don't feed your flesh. You just can't. Say, okay, Brother Coyle, I understand. Loving the world means that I'm guilty of feeding my flesh or the lust of the flesh. What would be some examples of what my flesh might lust after? That's a good question. Turn to Galatians 5, and we'll see a list of things. This is a list that God gives to us in Galatians chapter 5. And we'll start with verse number 16. Galatians 5, verse 16. This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. That's a powerful verse, at least it is proven to be for me. This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. When I first caught a glimpse of that verse, you know what I thought? I said, sign me up. I want that verse to work in my life.